All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joss Duncan, founder and chief storyteller of Love Now Media. Love Now Media is a media and news company that was founded in 2016. We primarily tell love stories and we want to amplify the voices of those who are working toward justice, wellness, and equity. So this is the fifth Lunch and Love event in our series. We've covered everything from motherly love to love and partnerships to political love. And so now this week, we're talking about faith, love, and justice. And I could not be more excited about the guest speakers that we have here today. So I'd like for you all to introduce yourselves. And I'd like to start with Asada Thomas. If you could, tell us who you are and what you do, please.
Absolutely. Greetings, everyone. I am Asata Thomas. I am the director at the Institute for Community Justice, where we support persons who have been impacted by mass incarceration. I am also a licensed minister under Bishop John Edmondson and Pastor Aisha at Victory in Christ Christian Center. And both of my worlds consistently collide and intersect as I adamantly and actively support persons who have been impacted by the justice, as it were, system.
I'm Imam Idris Abdul Zahir, resident Imam and board chair of National Law, the Center for Human Excellence, also an IT management professional in the Philadelphia area. Passionate about my community, passionate about seeing ongoing improvement and growth, and love is one of my favorite topics, so I'm glad to be here today.
Greetings, everyone. I am Bishop Dwayne Royster. I'm the Executive Director of Power Interfaith. We're actually celebrating our 10 years this year. We're about 100 plus congregations in 9 counties across the state of Pennsylvania, working towards racial and economic justice. I'm excited to be here today to talk about love because it is the motivation for why I get up in the morning to do what I do. And as I tell folk, I'm trying to change the damn world so people don't wake up in the morning feeling like they're waking up in hell. So I'm excited to be able to be here, be a part of this conversation, and figure out how we're going to transform the world.
That's great. So Bishop Royster, let's start with you. I would just like to ask, how did you learn the definition of love? How do you personally? So that's a question I'll put out to everyone.
Love was manifested in, emotions and care, support, material things. But I think at a very early age, I watched my mom, who was an organizer with East Mount Airy Neighbors in Philadelphia. This was a child growing up. I was 5, 6 years old. And she was caring about community, loving on community. And at the time, East Mount Airy was a neighborhood that was changing. It was going from white to being Black. We were doing actions. We were making sure that as the community was transforming to becoming an African-American community, that folk weren't doing things in our community they wouldn't do in other communities. And so at the very earliest stages of my life, love also meant caring for community at the same time. And it meant caring about your neighbors. It meant caring about the folk down the street. It meant caring about the institutions that were there. And it meant that we were all a part of that together. So love for me was all encompassing, that it wasn't just limited to my family, my parents, my siblings, but it really meant loving all that was around us and appreciating it and trying to make the most of it.
Yeah, such a great question. For me, the definition of love was and is personified through my mother. I grew up in a household of Jamaican immigrants. Both of my parents are from Jamaica. And so back then it wasn't cool to be from Jamaica. And so we were ridiculed in school coming up, and the things that we ate were different, et cetera, et cetera. And again, it wasn't cool back then. And so home was always the place and the source of love and light for me with my mom and my siblings. And so I would say at home. My father was in the home as well. But when you talk about like just this centering of love, it was absolutely as a result of all of who my mother is and was.
To me, love has always been sacrifice. Well, at least in its earliest my earliest understanding has been sacrifice. I watched my parents who came to Islam in the same tradition as Malcolm X really come into the community and give their all. And you know, the Muslim community that I come from, you know, was concerned with not only just, you know, the masjid and the folks there, but the surrounding community as well. Social justice, making sure people had food, you know, being good to our neighbors. So I watched my parents, you know, be involved in the community over the years. And to me, looking out for your neighbor, looking out for your family, and sacrificing for the greater good of not just yourself and your immediate family, but the overall community. That's always been, well, that's been my earliest understanding of love. Of course, it has evolved and become more full over the years, but I would start with that sacrifice and making sure, and just looking out for the needs of the people.
So I'd like to ask about your current work, both as faith leaders and as leaders in the justice space. What has it been like leading through faith and with love through the pandemic? And what have your challenges been? And if there are any opportunities that you've seen kind of open up as a result of the pandemic, can you talk about those?
For me, it was as we often say, baptism by fire, right? Um, because prior to that, I was the assistant imam at Master of the Law, and in March of last year is when I became the resident imam. I was elected in. It was quickly a thing where we had to come together and you know, make some decisions about just if we're going to close, when we're going to close, what services will continue, how we were going to continue it. Thankfully, I have an awesome team there that again love the community, and so for me, the biggest issue was, you know, making sure that people still got what they needed from us in their life. So that was really our thing, and my main concern. And thankfully, because you know we kind of laid that out and people responded to that, we were able to really weather that storm and be that source of resources for the community. And then when folks heard about the things that we were doing, they started to add on. So they started to send food from all over the country and send resources and things like that. So I just think that for me, the thing was, you know, just trying to make sure that we still serve the people as best that we could. So those are all the things that, but thankfully I had a great staff, a great supporting community that helped us weather the storm.
So, I mean, this was actually a very interesting time for us during COVID. So, I actually pastor a church in Washington, D.C., in addition to running power here in Pennsylvania, the Faith United Church of Christ in Northeast D.C. As a matter of fact, the image behind me is our sanctuary. Um, and so I mean, I could talk about it from that point, but I also want to talk about it from the standpoint of power and what we did during that time frame. And part of that was because there were ways that we were supporting congregations doing the food outreach. We actually had we raised money to be able to give to our congregations to like help people with rent and to be able to get whatever things that they needed to pay utilities before the moratoriums went into place and things of that nature to really help folk out. During this last year, we were battling. I mean, we had town halls with congressional leaders where we were calling on them to pass the Second CARES Act, where we were trying to, work to get the American Rescue Plan put in place because we knew that there were policies that actually were going to impact the communities that we cared deepest about and those that struggled the deepest simultaneously to be able to get vaccinations, to be able to get more testing, to be able to get the resources to stay in their homes, to be able to get additional monies to support them, to make sure that there was extra money for unemployment that would continue to sustain people. And so the work that we did, power never stopped. We had to pivot, but we never stopped doing what we were doing during the COVID crisis because we knew in this moment, literally, our work, people's lives depended on our work to really call for justice in this moment. In times of crisis, two things can happen. People either really learn to be generous and support one another, or folk get into a place of huddling back and trying to hold back and encroach. And I mean, let's be honest, we saw both of those things occur. And unfortunately, some of the power players that were out there were trying to hoard resources to themselves and their communities and prevent it from coming in other communities. And so we had to go fight because sometimes loving means you got to go fight. And not physically, but we had to go fight with our words, with our technology, with our voices to be able to say very clearly to folk, you're doing the wrong thing. And this is what our folks need to be able to not only survive, but to thrive in this moment. And so we continued that battle of ongoing work around public policy change, around changing laws, around creating opportunities for people to be able to be made whole and healthy in this particular moment in time. And we also supported those that were doing the missional work, we would call it in the Christian church, or the service work, where we were actually doing the food and the rent and doing all those other things at the same time. So for us, we had to kick it up another level and say, we gotta stop the bleeding before it starts. And so we fought hard to make that happen.
What happened was that we were equipped efficiently to be able to still serve the needs of the congregation, and that is and was always foremost in my leaders' mind, in terms of how do we continue to support the needs, and not just the spiritual needs, but indeed the physical needs. Because the Bible speaks about, I was hungry, you didn't feed me; I was in jail, you didn't come to see me. And so I tell my staff often as well, see, here's the translation, right? Or the transcending from one space to another, is that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So you got an AD, an MD, a PhD. Nobody cares about that. Folk want to know that you can identify the need and speak to the need and care for the person as a human, their dignity. And so in terms of my spiritual and my church life, that's how it presented. That's how I was able to be supportive community wise in that space. In the space of my work and what we do, is that I made a decision that ICJ would not close. In the work that I do, folk were still incarcerated, folk were still coming home, and folks still need to be supported. And so myself and some of my staff members, it was their choice to come in or to work from home. I made a decision that we cannot afford to close. And if I had to come in here every day by myself, that's what I was going to do, to continue to impact folk who were coming home with nothing, nowhere to go, or for folk who were on the inside and were impacted in another way, where in essence, everybody was in solitary confinement. So as leaders, as faith leaders, as leaders in what we do, we have been charged, if you were, with the ability to be able to shift and move to service and support folk. People were still hungry. People still needed rent paid. People still needed all of that. And so we were charged with figuring this, how does this work? Some was, for me personally, was trial and error. Others were mechanisms that indeed worked and continue to work. So now we can carry it on into as things open up. And so it opens up the space more and the work more, but I could not afford, in my opinion, and not because I'm big bad Asada, but because there were other folk who needed what I had or I could help to provide. And so I just continued, prayed. I was safe, doing all the things. Well, I always wash my hands, but continue to do the things necessary to stay safe for myself. And lastly, I want to say that we talk about love, and we talk about how that presents for us. But I first believe that we have to love ourselves, because you can't give out what you haven't honored in yourself and to yourself. I can't give you what I don't have to give. And so in that space of being able to do that, it was also, and is also, present tense, taking care of myself when I need to be taken care of. That means stepping away. That means when I leave work at 5 or 6 or 8, whatever, don't call me. I got to recharge to come back to recalibrate. And so this love, an extension of love, means also extending it to myself so that I can come back and extend out more the next day.
A lot of people have heard about restorative justice. And, what does it take to restore, people, communities, when there's justice, what kind of justice is needed for communities to be restored. But the idea that transformative justice presents is that systems, communities, structures don't need to be restored, they need to be transformed, because the system had a flaw in it to allow some of the injustices to ever occur. So I think the pandemic has really given us this opportunity to shift perspective, right? And really think about the transformation that is required. It's one thing to be advocating for, justice and restoration, but what are the new opportunities that we've seen, as it relates to resources, as it relates to economic justice, as it relates to, criminal and community justice resources. So I'd like to ask all of you that.
So I think I'll start with saying that you are exactly correct. You cannot you cannot reform a system that's operating the way it was designed to operate. Right? You have to, I'm a radical and revolutionary, so this might not sit well with a lot of people, but you have to eradicate and rebuild. You cannot reconfigure a system that is operating exactly the way it was designed, which is to suppress, which is white supremacy, which is patriarchal. And so this idea of transformation is absolutely, I think we're at a pivotal moment and at the precipice of something new and transforming how we do justice. And from the criminal justice perspective, I would say that you're not looking at or understanding crime, not in terms of people, but in terms of relationship. And before it even gets to the crime, we need to talk about before the crime. So what are we dealing with, the poverty or with the hunger, with the trauma that has happened before we get to the crime piece? Because we want to deal with the fruit issues and not with the root issues. And if you don't deal with the root, you're going to continue to deal with the little apples and the oranges. But what's the root of the issue? And until we begin for this transformative and restorative process, right? These circles, these healing circles, it is designed to do exactly that. Find this commonality in language. Find this commonality in understanding of folk just saying, oh, well, I didn't know that. Repairing harm in a way that is transformative and not punitive. Where has punitive got us? So violence begets violence. So violence or crime happens, and then another violence is done from the system, because now we're incarcerating people. That's violence. And so as I think that, as you said, this pandemic has given us opportunity to really have these transformative spaces that indeed change our communities once we begin to deal with root issues and not fruit of the root.
I agree with Minister Thomas. One of the challenges that we face is that the system, as we understand it from a certain perspective, is broken, but in many ways it operates the way that it does because it was how it was designed to operate. And so part of the thing I keep talking about is how do we become architects of a new America? Right, recognizing that from my faith tradition, in the Hebrew text in Jeremiah, it talks about you have to pull down, to destroy, pluck up and overthrow, and then build and to plant. Right, and in some ways, I mentioned earlier before we were on the air about this notion of revolutionary love. Right, I love my people, but wait a minute, watch this. I love all of God's people enough, and I believe that all of us are created in the image and likeness of God, whether we choose to follow God or not, by whatever means. But that I love humanity and all of God's creation, which is nature and other things itself. That I'm willing to be an act and out of love to create revolution so that we can make this thing actually work correctly. And what I believe we have a problem is that we are not really understanding how there is ongoing moral injury when we continue to live in a place of white supremacy, when we live in a place of patriarchy, when we live in a place where we dehumanize others and do not see the fullness of who they are as they are created in the image and likeness of God. And so I love my folk. I want them to be able to thrive. But I love white folk and Asian Pacific Islanders and indigenous folk and Latinx folk and biracial folk, right? And folk that might not be a part of that diaspora that I just named, enough that I also want us to be able to address the moral injury that comes for the oppressor as a result of oppressing the oppressed. Y'all missed that one. I'm gonna run that back here for a sec. So there is injury that is done to white people's moral center and soul, or men's center and soul, when they oppress women or when they oppress folk of color. And so I don't want them to have to deal with moral injury. So I want to be able to get to a place where we don't have to contend with that, and that we can see each other for the gift that we are to each other and to the world, and that all of our cultures, all of our races, all of our ethnicities, all of our faith traditions bring blessing to the community as a whole. That when we come together, we are ultimately trying to create somehow or another an image of what it looks like when we see each other as fully human. And then we have the audacity to believe that we can kind of push the world into becoming that space where we can all respect each other, hear each other, love on each other, learn from each other, grow together, and become something more than what this world is right now, because this world is failing. This world is failing as we understand it. But I love what God created enough that I don't want it to fail in a way if I can transform it into something that it should have been in the first place.
I could go all day about this. I'll try to keep it succinct. One of the things that came up in my mind as our brother Bishop was just speaking was a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, where he said to help your brother if he's being oppressed or if he's oppressing, right? And the question was asked, how do you help your brother if he's being an oppressor? And the answer was stop him from oppressing, right? So we as people of faith, have a moral obligation to be involved when people are being oppressed, and also, when someone's doing the oppression, right? Because, there's something that's happening to the hearts and the souls of the people who stand by and are silent while it's going on and know it's wrong, and also those that are actively involved in doing it, right? And we should be concerned about their souls too. The next thing I want to also point out is just another quote from the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, where he said, that you will not enter paradise until you believe or until you have faith, and you will not have faith until you love each other, right? And he said, shall I show you a thing that if you did it, you would love each other, right? And he said, spread the peace amongst each other, right? So spread the peace. You can't have peace when there's injustice. You can't have peace when there's oppression. You can't have peace when there's, ongoing wrongdoing. And at this point, African Americans are experts on, what was done wrong to us. I mean, we have whole commissions on slavery. Folks can break down. I mean, right now the Tulsa thing is really hot right now. We're breaking it down and going through the history, what happened the day before, how it started, who did it, right? But transformational justice makes it such that this thing is not acceptable in our community for anyone, right? And that any one of us will step up and speak out and fight against wrongdoing when it's done to anyone, right? And so again, I go back to the Quran now, where there's verses that basically say that when there's war between your brothers, you should make peace, right? And then when the peace is made, if somebody breaks the peace, then it's our duty to come together and then subdue those that are breaking the peace, right? What that looks like is being involved to a certain degree in politics, being there at those discussions and closed door discussions and open air discussions, right? Really being there to make sure certain things happen. This year, the pandemic's happened, but also, the social unrest was happening as well. And we were called on, to handle that as well. And again, the root of that social unrest, was injustice, that had been going on for so long, and no justice was being served. And at some point, people just reacted, and you saw what you saw around the nation, but also around the world. We have to restore justice and then make it such that this is not the norm any further, right? Because people it's like putting a Band-Aid on a wound. It's not going to be fully okay until the wound is healed, right?
If any of you wants to chime in or answer first, do you feel like people have lost faith? And what do you think people should or could have faith in at this turning point in our world?
I would say I found that a lot of people's faith became stronger in the pandemic. I know mine certainly did. It was an opportunity for a lot of people. Obviously, I'm in a privileged position where I wasn't completely scrambling, trying to figure out how I was going to eat and things like that. So, keeping that in perspective. But it was an opportunity for me to settle. There was nothing going on. You have nothing but to face yourself. And it was for me a time where I looked at everything and I said, what is it that I want to change in my life? Where can I be improving? I was having like legacy conversations with myself, stuck in that apartment alone.
For faith reasons, but also for self-preservation reasons, people are tapping in and connecting themselves with faith in an organization, more specifically, because of the fact that, if you're out here, you're on your own, and part of the strength in numbers and strength in being a part of a congregation someplace is that you have a group of people speaking on your behalf, giving resources on your behalf, and can connect you to what you kind of need. Part of the disillusionment with faith and religion as an institution altogether is that people don't see it acting, making an impact in their lives, right? That you have faith institutions and all around it is chaos and not much is changing because people have faith. So I just think that the more effective we are as faith leaders in actually helping to transform the environment, I think we'll see more people start to believe. Now, of course, we don't, their faith in God and and that is all between them and God, right? But the best we can do is show a good example, the best example we can as human beings with our own frailty, and hopefully give them something to believe in, right? So
I really loved in our introductions before folk came on, bishops and imam work together right on this faith. And that's what we need, the de-siloing of, well, I'm Christian, so I can't work with this person, and this person doesn't believe, and this person. But what about the belief in humanity? And going back to the core of what that is and building a better space for all of us, regardless of our faith beliefs. So I just wanted to name that made my heart smile. And I love that. And as we continue to de-silo and come from out of our own specifications of what we have to do, this, of course, no, what about just decent, common, this love that we talk about? The Bible talks about faith, hope, but the greatest of these is love. And not this romanticized, my boo loving. I'm talking about the love for humanity and what that is.
My biggest dream and hope is to imagine that our systems are led by people that are actually most deeply impacted by them, instead of the people that appear to be the most educated to understand them. So I really want my biggest we have a saying in our organizing that the people who are closest to the pain have to lead the movement. And so I would love, for our communities to be led by the people from the communities and not the puppet masters that are pulling the strings from far away. So it's like the people closest to the pain, they're the ones that are leading the movement and transforming the systems that we need to get changed.
I want to thank our sponsors for the whole series of the Lunch and Love events. Again, this is the last of 5. And so Independent Public Media Foundation, the Linfest Institute for Journalism, the Leeway Foundation, and of course, Power Interfaith. Thank you so much for getting behind the work we're doing. We are also kicking off 11 Days of Love Stories, starting June 14th, and it'll run from June to June 24th. So follow us on all social media. Check out Philly Cam at 11 a.m. every day during the series. We're gonna have love stories going. Love stories will be everywhere. So I just wanna thank you all once again for joining us today. I'll be following up with all of the speakers and Thank you to everyone who hopped on and contributed